Welcome to Shelby Explains Air. Please review the safety information in the seat back in front of you. In the event of a water landing, we may be screwed because how the hell did that happen? Please keep your mobile devices on at all times because it's probably how you're watching this video. Thank you for choosing us for your entertainment and educational needs. That took way too long to film because every single part of a flight attendant's job is harder than it looks. Flight attendants are misunderstood. Let's fix that. Hello and welcome. My name's Shelby, and on this channel I try to explain misunderstood topics using research, analysis, and a wide variety of perspectives. If that sounds interesting, please keep watching and consider checking out some of the other videos on the channel. Flight attendants have been known by many names: stewardess, air hostess, trolley dolly, cabin crew, but in my opinion, none of them really capture the wide scope of their responsibilities. If you've ever flown in a commercial airline, you probably have a basic sense of a flight attendant's duties, but you may underestimate the extent of their training and preparation. Fun fact, the first flight attendants were men. In the early years of commercial aviation, the staff were all men. Not unusual in that time. The stewards would serve many functions. They would serve guests, they would load baggage, they would even take the blocks off the plane wheels. Then came Ellen Church. Ellen Church was a licensed pilot, but nobody was hiring female pilots at this time. But she loved aviation. She was also a trained nurse, and she decided to use that as her way to get into the field.
Ellen Church went to San Francisco to the office of what would later become United Airlines. Then she went to an executive and she said, "I think if there were nurses on airplanes, more people would fly."
Now let's talk about what flying was like back in this day. Today, flying is not particularly comfortable. I don't particularly enjoy flying, but I do it because in this country, in the US, it's still the best way to travel long distances. But it's not fun. You're shoulder to shoulder with a stranger. It's cramped. There's a lot of waiting. Not much legroom. You're getting fewer and fewer amenities. You're nickel and dimed for everything, and all you get is a little can of Coke and a little thing of pretzels. But back in the day, plane travel was even worse. In the early days of commercial aviation, they flew much lower. They flew under 10,000 feet, so they felt every bump, every bit of turbulence. They were very rough. It was not unusual for customers to get high anxiety and very sick on planes. In fact, back in those days, if anyone traveled regularly, like for work, it wasn't unusual for them to be unable to get life insurance because of the risk. Flying was not safe. Today, flying is very safe. It is the safest form of transportation, but back in the early days, not so much. So flight anxiety was very high, and having calming, reassuring women on board was helpful. It was also helpful for grown men to feel embarrassed if they were freaking out on a plane and the young woman was not. Passengers were mostly men, mostly businessmen, and they also just enjoyed being served by young women.
The airlines started to realize the passengers were more attracted to having a woman do the job for the charm that she brought, the attractiveness that she brought to an otherwise exceptionally unpleasant experience.
The job was immediately incredibly sought after. It offered good pay, independence, and a chance to travel, things that at this time most women had zero access to. Here's an article from the New York Times from 1936 talking about this brand new career open to women, and it really glorifies it. It talks about how exciting it is, how glamorous it is, how much they love it, and how they're constantly going on dates with pilots. Flight attendants were required to be trained nurses until World War II, when this country decided that most of our nurses were needed for, hospitals and war. So flight attendants gradually moved away from providing reassurance and medical care and moved towards providing customer service, hospitality, and, let's be real, eye candy. Especially on major airlines like the iconic Pan Am, stewardesses were given very glamorous perks and high social status.
Oh, you're a stewardess? You were just on the same level as a celebrity movie star. It opened the doors to everything. Clubs, parties. You could crash a wedding and say you were a stewardess.
But they were also held to strict and sometimes dehumanizing standards.
The grooming supervisors were former flight attendants. Their whole job was to make sure that your high heels were 3 inches tall, that you had white gloves that were white, no runs in your stockings. Your shoes were polished, not just the right heel height.
They'd look you over and gal would do like this to your buttocks to see if you had your girdle on.
Because the job was so highly sought after, so well regarded, so idolized, these women were often reminded that they were disposable, replaceable. If you didn't meet the high standards, if you didn't smile, if you advocated yourself, if you asked tough questions, you were gone. Here in the US, throughout the 1960s, we had the civil rights movement where people of color and women were finally starting to get some legal rights. Kind of. We're working on it. And airlines had to stop doing things like firing people for getting pregnant or turning 32. But just a reminder that just because a discrimination law is passed does not mean that automatically everyone is treated fairly and according to the law. People have to spend years using the legal system to get the rights that they are legally entitled to, because companies do not follow the law until they know that the court is going to make them. So we have people like Dusty Rhodes who spent years in legal battles trying to end age discrimination. And people like Patricia Banks Edmiston, who after graduating from a highly acclaimed stewardess training program had to fight for years to get hired at all because she was Black. During this time, there also started to be a little bit of pushback on the blatantly sexist advertising the airlines were using.
Just say when. I'm Judy, and I was born to fly. Fly me.
Remember what it was like before Southwest Airlines? You didn't have huskies and hot pants.
The airstrip. Hot pants. Not exactly encouraging people to treat these women with respect. These advertisements not only offended women, but directly caused flight attendants and stewardesses to be harassed and treated like an object while they were trying to do their jobs. I think just looking at the uniforms really shows the progress of the flight attendant treatment throughout the years. It starts out very professional, very medical, then it goes to performative and provocative to today, where it's mostly professional and functional. And as far as we've come, we're still making progress. There are still some airlines that are stuck in the past. For example, Virgin Atlantic finally decided in 2019 to let their female flight attendants wear pants. Gee, thanks. And we still have things like VietJet promoting their flight attendants like this. Just while we're talking about uniforms, something I think that's really cool that some, particularly Asian airlines do, is incorporate some of their traditional garments and traditional patterns into their uniforms, and I just think that's a really cool regional touch. So, our first myth that is so pervasive: flight attendants are just sky waitresses. First, let's talk about the different types of flight attendants. So if you're like me and you've flown on commercial airlines, you're probably only familiar with commercial flight attendants. And that is the bulk of the industry. But there are also corporate flight attendants who tend to fly on company and private jets. Those flight attendants tend to have fewer clients, they tend to be higher end clients, they tend to have broader responsibilities, very specialized service, a focus on discretion. I don't know as much about that type of flight attendant, so it's a perfectly valid type. I'm just not going to talk about it much. I'm going to mostly focus on commercial flight attendants, which is what most of us are going to encounter in our lives. I'm also going to focus more on major airlines instead of regional and local airlines, just because those vary wildly, and the major airlines tend to be the ones that kind of set the standards, set the trends in the industry, and the regionals follow. So in the US, that's airlines like United, Delta, American, Southwest, and then we're going to be talking about some international major ones too. Ryanair, Emirates, Qatar, Lufthansa. I probably said that wrong, so this is my blanket apology to the country of Germany. So what you mostly see as a passenger, a flight attendant doing is a lot of waitress or waiter type responsibilities. They bring you their drink, they bring you your food, your snacks, they're welcoming you aboard. But as some of you may know, the number one duty of any flight attendant is safety. And I don't just mean the little safety demonstration and talk they give at the beginning that you ignore. Flight attendants are highly trained to deal with just about anything that could go wrong on a flight. Being a flight attendant is one of those jobs where you hope that you never use 80% of your training and skills. But the fact is, flight attendants are there to save your life. So be nice to them. Flight attendants are trained to deal with evacuations, life rafts, firefighting, first aid, CPR, defibrillation, emergency landing procedures, decompression emergencies, and security, because some of you crazy people are getting on flights and pulling crazy shit. And unfortunately for them, a big part of a flight attendant's job is to make sure that all of us are following the rules.
Seatbelt sign is on. But is it against the law, though? The light is on. Is it against the law? You see that there's a picture of a seatbelt on that sign. No, but is it against the law, though? The fasten seatbelt sign is on. But is it against the law, though? Seatbelt sign is on. But is it against the law? Seatbelt sign is on. But is it against the law? Seatbelt sign. But is it against the law? It's on. Seatbelt sign is on. Seatbelt sign is on. Seatbelt sign is on.
Flight attendants have to make sure that we all follow FAA regulations. And please remember, flight attendants do not make the rules. The rules are set by the FAA, or the airline, or the airport, or local laws. They are not making the rules, so please just do what they say within reason. I know a lot of you have probably had a rough experience with a flight attendant because they're not all perfect. I will share one of mine. I had a bag underneath the seat in front of me and it didn't quite fit, and the flight attendant was very frustrated with me and kept telling me to put it up in the overhead bin. He would not let me finish my sentence, and after the 4th time he cut me off to tell me that it had to go in the overhead bin, I undid the zipper to show him that inside this bag was my dog. I had purchased a pet carrier directly from the airline, and it didn't quite fit under the seat for some reason, but I really didn't have a lot of options because I didn't feel like putting my dog in the overhead bin. So I'm going to be talking up flight attendants a lot in this video because I think they should be treated better by the employers and the general public, but trust me, I understand they're not all perfect. So you want to be a flight attendant. How do you do it? First thing you have to do is, shocking, apply. Now, these jobs are incredibly sought after, so most airlines only open up the job a couple times a year, and they are flooded with applicants. Harvard University is one of the hardest colleges to get into here in the US, very well regarded. It has an acceptance rate between 3 and 4% depending on the year. The acceptance rate for flight attendants into the training program at American Airlines, 1%. And at Delta Airlines, it's even less at 0.6%. These are not easy jobs to get. Delta Airlines is the most competitive. It is considered by many the most sought after. They tend to have the highest pay, the best chances for going up in the company, and a lot of times they have profit sharing for flight attendants. I will say there is one caveat. Delta Airlines is the only major US airline where the flight attendants are not unionized. So a lot of these perks, a lot of these higher pays that they give are to keep their flight attendants from unionizing. So if you want to be a flight attendant, you just have to think about that. If a union is important to you, Delta is not the way to go. If you don't give a crap about a union, then maybe you want to go for Delta. So you applied, you interviewed, you got the job. Now you're off to your airline's training. Congratulations! You will spend weeks with intense tests, drills, and simulations. It is intense, and only about 60% of people make it through the training the first time, and people don't graduate for a lot of reasons. Failing tests or drills, bad attitude or customer service, they post something very stupid on social media during training, or they just opt to leave. It's not for them. This is a job that is definitely not for everybody. I'll tell you right now, it's not for me. Airlines invest a lot of money into these trainings with high-tech simulations and plane replicas to simulate a whole number of emergency situations.
We try to train as in realistic of an environment as possible.
Right.
So we have things like the audio, we'll play sounds like the captain giving commands saying open the door or release your seatbelt.
You're putting out fires, you're doing water evacuations, you're doing CPR. They are trying to prepare you for anything that could go wrong on a flight. And again, all this training, all this intensity is to try and save your life if anything should go wrong on a flight. Training can be anywhere from 4 to 10 weeks, and it is usually unpaid. They will probably give you housing, and you may get a small stipend for food, but it's unpaid. Plus, in any new job, you generally don't get paid right away. You have to wait for at least one pay cycle. So if you're going into flight attendant training, it may be 2 or 3 months until you get your next paycheck. So Not only is it very competitive to even get into the program, and not only is the program itself very intense and a lot of people don't pass, you also have to have enough money to be able to live and pay your bills and pay whatever else you need to pay for 2 to 3 months before you start getting money from the airline. Plus, you may have to move. During training, you're going to be assigned a base or a hub. This is where your flights will leave from. Now, there are flight attendants who commute, who don't live right in their base or their hub. But logistically, it's a nightmare. And generally, when you're brand new and you don't have any seniority, that's probably not going to be possible. Now, they do let you rank. They try to take into consideration where you want to live, which hub you want to be based at, but they can't always do that because it's whatever the airline's going to need. So say you're a brand new flight attendant at United. You're just getting ready to finish your training and you put in all the bases that you want. Here's their base map. As a new flight attendant, you're probably going to get one of the blue bases. So maybe your first choice is Los Angeles. I don't know why, but maybe it is. And your second choice is Chicago, and your third choice is San Francisco. Maybe you'll get one of those 3, or maybe they're going to send you to Houston or New Jersey. It's going to be based on your airline's needs. So as a new flight attendant, you're going to have very little control. Usually after about 6 months, you can request a transfer, but there's no guarantee. One thing I learned about flight attendants in researching this video is that seniority is huge. Seniority is true in most jobs, but in flight attendants especially. Staying long enough to get seniority with your airline is going to hugely improve the control over your life, what base you're at, what flights you're doing, what your schedule is. Flight attendants with really high seniority can very much design their own schedule. They have a lot of power, but as a new flight attendant, you're not going to have any of that. So if you don't live near the base that you're assigned to, you have a choice to make. You can go through the tough, grueling process of trying to commute, or you're going to have to move. But my whole point of this is that whether it's the unpaid training, having to move, all these different things, becoming a flight attendant is grueling, it is time consuming, and it is expensive. So let's talk about what a flight attendant schedule might actually look like. And this brings us to another myth, that flight attendants have regular routes. Now, you might find some senior flight attendants who only choose to fly certain routes. They have kind of a set schedule. But for the majority of flight attendants, this is not the case. And that's for a couple reasons. One is that especially on larger airlines, routes and schedules change constantly. You know, especially with a major airline, you might not always have a Tuesday morning flight from Miami to New York. That might not be the case. It's going to change. It's going to fluctuate. And the second is that a lot of flight attendants don't want to fly the same route over and over again. They got into this job for travel and for new experiences and excitement and variation. So a lot of them really don't have a lot of interest in regular routes. So if a flight attendant does have a regular route, they probably either have high seniority and that's the route that they want, or they have a specific skill like a language. So if an airline only has a few flight attendants that speak Portuguese, those flight attendants are going to have priority on any of the flights that go to Portugal or Brazil. So most flight attendants have irregular schedules. One of the reasons why this job seems way too stressful and grueling for me. Let's talk flight attendant pay. And it is more complicated than you might think. I spent a lot of time figuring it out. Flight attendant pay can be very complicated and very different depending on where you are in the world. So I'm going to try and simplify it. If you're a flight attendant or you know a flight attendant, you might hear me talking and be like, that's oversimplified. You're skipping this and this and this. You're totally right. I'm trying to keep it to the basics to try and make it like digestible and kind of just hit the most important points. So there's a few different types of pay. The first one is flight hour pay. This is the hourly pay you get during the flight. So as soon as the flight doors close, and then as soon as the flight doors open on the other end of the flight, that's when you get paid. Door closed to door open. This is generally the highest pay that you get. Here in the US, it's going to start between $20 and $40 an hour and then go up with your seniority. Note, this generally does not include boarding. So this is once the doors close and once the doors open. While all of us are boarding and stowing our bags and complaining about seats and trying to find our seats and sitting in the wrong seat, a lot of times they're not getting paid for that shit. Some airlines are starting to pay their flight attendants for boarding time. This is a new development. It's just in the last few years, and it tends to be around 50% of flight pay. So whatever they're making while we're in the air, they're going to make half of that per hour during the boarding and unboarding process. So if a flight attendant is giving you a lovely smile while you're getting onto the plane, please remember that they may not be getting paid for that. That may be a free smile. Try and appreciate it. So you have flight pay, you might have boarding pay, and then the other part of it is per diem. So the per diem is what you're paid through the entire assignment, the moment you clock into the airport you're leaving from, and the moment you clock out when you get back. So that includes times when you're not even at the airport. When you're sleeping at the hotel that they get for you, you are being paid your per diem rate. Depending on your airline and where you are in the world, it's either going to be a flat rate or per hour. Here in the US, it's usually an hourly per diem. Hourly rate is usually between $2 and $4. And yes, that sounds very low. So how much does this all add up to? The median pay in 2024 in the US for flight attendants was $67,000. So half of the flight attendants in the US make over $67,000 a year, and half the flight attendants in the US make less than $67,000 in the year. The low end is about $25,000. That is unusual and very, very low. And the high end for a really senior flight attendant who's flying a lot of flights is $150,000. So you can make really good money as a flight attendant. But again, the job is grueling and you really need to get that seniority. As far as benefits, flight attendants generally get similar benefits to a lot of other jobs, so access to health insurance and retirement accounts. But the big perk for flight attendants is free flights. Flight attendants can generally get free or discounted flights for them and their friends and family, so it makes them very popular. So who are flight attendants? I think if you're familiar with the history of flight attendants, you might still be stuck in that stereotype of it all being young women in their 20s. Now, there are absolutely young female flight attendants in their 20s, but they're certainly not the majority anymore. This may surprise you. The average age of a flight attendant is late 40s. Not as surprising, 79% of flight attendants are women, 21% are men, so it's still a very female-dominated industry. 60% of flight attendants in the US are white, and about 29% of the flight attendants in the US identify as someone in the LGBTQIA community. I thought that was kind of a cool fact. So let's talk about what the requirements are to be a flight attendant. We already talked about the fact that it's very competitive and the training is very grueling, but what are the base requirements to even get your foot in the door? Well, back in the day, the requirements were a little bit different. Here's a set of requirements from 1954 from Chicago and Southern Airlines. You must be single. It was not unusual for flight attendants to get fired if they got married. You must be between the ages of 22 and 28. It was not unusual for flight attendants to get fired once they hit a certain age, 28, 32, 35. Between 5'2" and 5'5", this one actually makes sense, having some height restrictions and height requirements make sense because you're flying on a plane that's a certain size. So back in the day, the planes were smaller and they needed shorter women. Between 100 and 120 pounds, this was partially due to, again, the plane and the weight restrictions, and partially due to sexism. Good eyesight. They were not allowed to wear glasses back in the day. Good teeth. Good figure and slender legs. They wanted skinny women. The ability to carry a lively conversation. This one makes sense. Back in the day, it was kind of geared more towards entertainment, but today still it really requires good customer service and people skills. Good carriage. I don't even know, man. Willing and anxious to please. Creepy. Excellent health, clear skin, and nice hands. Some of these are just really creepy. These days, the requirements are functional. What do you actually need to be able to do your job? So I looked at the 10 major airlines in the entire world. Some of them in the US, some of them outside the US. I have all of them listed below in the description box if you want to look at their pages of requirements, but I've kind of summarized all their requirements into one list because they're all very similar. So in general, to be a modern flight attendant, you need at least a high school diploma, no visible tattoos in uniform, and there tend to be piercing limits, like maybe you can only have one set of ear piercings or no nose piercings, or it depends on the airline. Must be at least 20 or 21. There is no age upper limit, just a minimum these days. You must be at least 5'2", and they have certain requirements for how far and how high you have to be able to reach. Now, these make sense. This is not a vanity thing. This is, you need to be able to reach into the overhead bin. You need to be able to open the emergency door. There are physical things that you have to be able to do that you probably won't be able to do if you're under 5 feet. You have to be able to lift, bend, squat, kneel, stand, all the things that flight attendants have to do physically. You need to be able to do them. You need to be strong enough to open and close the plane doors by yourself. There are no weight or size limits these days, except for the height and reach minimum, but you must be able to fit in the exit window, and you must be able to sit in the jump seat without a seatbelt extender. So bigger people may not be qualified. And again, I don't think that's bad. I'm a bigger person, and I don't see this as a vanity thing or as a looks requirement. I see this as functional. You need to be able to sit in the jump seat without a seatbelt extender. Because of safety, you have to be able to fit through the emergency doors so you can help passengers. So these are still functional requirements. And then finally, you have to have basic swimming skills. So in case of a water landing, you need to be able to help passengers, and you need to be able to do that in the water. So just like with uniforms, we can see the progression. It started from performative, and now it's much more functional. You have to be able to physically do the job. Our next myth, I'm really not going to go in depth because it's so insulting, but there are still a lot of people who have this mindset of flight attendants have boyfriends all over the world. First of all, not all flight attendants are women and gay guys. There are straight men who are flight attendants. But secondly, this is just kind of insulting. A lot of flight attendants are married. A lot of flight attendants are in committed relationships. A lot of flight attendants are single and they don't choose to have partners all over the world. Some of them do. Maybe there are flight attendants who have a boyfriend in all these different places that they travel. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But please stop assuming that it's true. Please also stop assuming that they always sleep with the pilots. It's just insulting. These are people at a job. Some of them are in committed relationships, some of them are not. Some of them are promiscuous, some of them are not. They're just people. It's all fine. Just stop assuming things about their lives, please. Our final myth, that being a flight attendant is glamorous. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt glamorous getting off a plane? I haven't. I know my first stop after a flight is to go to the bathroom to get some space, to probably reapply some deodorant, maybe splash some water on my face, maybe put on some moisturizer because the plane air is so dry, and just kind of in general freshen up because I do not feel at my freshest getting off an airplane. Now imagine if you were working that entire flight instead of binging Netflix. Imagine if you'd spent that entire flight serving ginger ale to screaming children, or asking drunk people to stay in their seat, and doing it all in uncomfortable shoes.
The seat's empty. She's obviously nervous. We'll calm her down.
You know what? I understand, but Claire is right.
Everybody go back to your seats.
Okay, you especially.
Whatever you say. Stove.
It's Steve.
Stove. What kind of name is that?
Well, that's not a name. My name is Steve.
Are you an appliance?
No, I'm a man, and my name is Steve.
You're a flight attendant.
That's absolutely accurate.
The perks of the job can absolutely be glamorous. That's why a lot of people do it. Being paid to wake up in Paris or Tokyo sounds amazing. Waking up in Buffalo after 4 hours of sleep does not sound amazing.
There is no other job where you can work a flight to Cancun or some tropical destination and stay at a beautiful beachfront resort. And you're not paying for it, you're actually being paid to be there. Of course, it is not always that glamorous. You do have days where you're up at 2 in the morning, you work 4 legs, you have long sits at the airport, and you know, you have really rough days sometimes, but you also have more, in my opinion, fabulous days that make up for it.
So there can absolutely be glamour in this job. You get to see places, you get to meet people, you get to travel. Those are all really glamorous and exciting things. But the job itself, I don't think is very glamorous. It's hard work. It's physically difficult and it's socially difficult. You're dealing with a lot of people. Customer service can be very, very draining. And on top of all that, there are real hazards and dangers with being a flight attendant, especially being one long term. So the first is sleep disruptions. You're constantly changing time zones. You have long shifts. You have irregular schedules. You're constantly working holidays. I really like this post by this flight attendant showing how she spent all the different holidays. But your schedule is changed and constantly, and that can be really, really bad for your sleep. Sleep is so important, and flight attendants are constantly changing their sleep schedule, and that can have some long-term effects on your health. On top of that, the air quality inside a plane cabin is not great. There's a reason why planes are known for getting people sick. Flight attendants are going to catch things from passengers, and due to low air quality in the cabin, they might even develop respiratory conditions from years of service. Multiple studies have also found a higher risk of certain cancers, including skin, breast, uterine, gastrointestinal, cervical, and thyroid. All of these cancers are significantly higher in flight attendants than in the general population. There are lots of factors, but one of them may be the higher chance of cosmic ionizing radiation. It is known by the WHO as a known carcinogen, and it is higher in higher altitudes. And flight attendants spend a lot of time in higher altitudes. So do pilots. We also have a rise in unruly passengers, so people are getting injured by assholes. According to NPR and the Association of Flight Attendants, 70% of flight attendants say they have been sexually harassed in flight. But there are ways to combat this.
Here's what you do if a passenger touches your butt. Grip both headrests directly behind them. Lock eye contact. Screech like a bat. They will not touch you again.
So I think my biggest takeaway is when a flight attendant tells you to do something, chances are they're either trying to keep you safe, trying to follow federal aviation laws, or both. I told my story about my bad flight attendant. There are bad flight attendants, but unless what they're telling you to do is going to harm you or someone around you, like putting a dog in an overhead bin, unless it's actually going to hurt another living creature, just do what they say. They're probably just trying to get you to follow the law. So follow their instructions, treat them with respect, and don't touch them. It's weird. In honor of today's topic, I've made a donation to Therapy, spelled like AIR, like airline. It's clever. It's an organization that was founded by a flight attendant for flight attendants to try and help their mental health. All the things we talked about throughout this video, the health hazards, the sleep disruptions, the customer service, the unruly passengers, that can really mess with you. So this organization offers a crisis text line for flight attendants and also helps flight attendants find and pay for therapy. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, this is an overview, not a deep dive. So if you know a flight attendant or you are a flight attendant, I'm sure you're being like, oh, you didn't talk about this, or you didn't go into this depth, or you oversimplified that. I absolutely did. So please listen to the flight attendants in your life for more information. And if you are a flight attendant, please comment below. I really want to hear your lived perspective. I find this profession fascinating, but also something that I never want to do. So I really want to hear about your experiences. So please comment below. I post a new video every week, and I really hope to see you in the next one.